it's March the 18th, Wednesday. Okay, so yesterday with a lovely millennial astrologer, it was lots of fun. So we had a couple of technical hitches, but it was a lot of fun, and there's a lot of Q&As. We kind of ended up kind of chatting and talking about, which I found very interesting, because it's quite often what happens is you have questions that you think are really weird, and you might not want to ask them for fear of thinking these are really weird, but often they're not. You will often be put in situations where when you get to an opportunity to start saying something like that, someone else goes, oh yeah. So someone mentioned about babies, knowing about when someone's going to get pregnant, and it's like, well, yeah, it's not everybody, but some people have an affinity with babies, and if you have an affinity with babies, you usually or knowing when the cycle of life is starting in a physical sense, when the baby's being born, you will probably also have the other side of being able to see death. I also mentioned that most people who are sensitive can see somebody who's very close to death, like a few days away. However, some people are very attuned, and usually these are people who can see the pregnancy on its way, are very attuned to seeing that a little bit further away in the distance. I mean, if you look energetically, then births and deaths aren't so much instant in the way, obviously a birth is not his birth. We're talking about conception. Conception happens energetically before it happens physically. So if you're working with energy, then as soon as it becomes in the energy, you can see it, and that can be years in advance. And if you're not very good at reading energy, you can. A lot of psychics will get timings wrong, because they'll read it as coming, and then they'll think it's closer than it is, which is very interesting. I should do a video on that, really. Tons of ideas. And also you'll see death. Death can be a physical quick death. Someone said they were here and then they were gone, but often you can see that in the energy. Now, seeing death brings up this idea that you can prevent death. Not so much the case. It's one of those things where sometimes you have to live with it. You have to live with the knowledge of that person dying. Thankfully, usually you only get it for a few days. It can be hard. Those few days aren't too bad, but if you are seeing death in advance, you are going to have to learn how to manage that and understand that it's not necessarily about you doing something about it. Sometimes it is there because you are there to support the people around you. Because sometimes we do things when we don't know. If you don't know the whole picture, and a lot of people's regret after someone's died is that I wish I'd said this, I wish I'd done this, I wish I had spent more time with them. So if you know that person has a limited time, you can actually say to them, oh, you know what, why don't you go and spend the time because it's not for you to go around telling people when they are when they're going to die, or telling somebody else. It's really quite unfair, because it's a burden that sometimes you'll have, but is it fair to give that to somebody else? Does it make you feel good? Because some people will do it, and yes, it's a great prediction, doesn't mean that you should be going around saying these things. You need to be very careful around that, and often you need to find out the reason why you need to know, because I just think that sometimes these kind of subjects need to be sensitively handled. And if you feel that you don't want to know that information, in general, you can ask, no, I don't want to know that. It gets a little bit harder when it's your family and when you're connected to them, because obviously you have that connection, and when you are with, you create that connection with your loved ones, and therefore it's hard not to know certain things about them, because the more you're connected, the more you're going to be unless you're going to try and kind of shut down completely, you tend to, which is very hard to maintain relationships that way, all kinds of relationships, not just romantic, to be present and to be open to them. It does mean that you might know some things about them that might not want to know, and yeah, you might know when the time comes that it's happening, but it also can give you a lot of comfort. You do get the opportunity to speak to them. You do get the opportunity to nudge people in the right direction. Say, you know what? How about you go and spend that time with them? I had a good example with one of the times one of my friends, her father was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and originally the prognosis was a lot longer than it was in the end. And she was living abroad, and she was very much like, well, okay, well, we're kind of going to do this and this, and she had a plan A, and she was going to stay there, she was going to do all these bits, and I knew that he was not going to last as long as she thought. In fact, actually not as long at all compared to what they were given. Obviously that's an estimate. Now, I'm never going to turn around and say, oh yeah, but you don't turn around to somebody and say, oh yeah, but they're not going to die, they're going to die this time. You don't do it. I actually knew roughly when they were going to die. But I was able to say, how about you think about plan B? What if, something happens tomorrow, what would you do? And she did actually have to enact her plan B, not quite to the next day, but a few months after she had to. So I was able to kind of help her plan that, so that when the information came up and she had to make that rush decision, she had things in place. So it was a lot easier. Doesn't make the death easier. And sometimes you're not there to make the death easier. Sometimes you're just there to support people. But it is a burden, you cannot know things and only just know all the nice things. There are times when you know the not so pleasant things. And knowing that, whether it be death or something else, is something that you have to learn to cope with and learn to manage. But the outside is you have some amazing experiences. When we talked about pregnancy, especially with people who've been a long for baby and they're kind of like worried and things like that, and you can see that kind of conception happening, and at some point they're going to be, or beforehand you're just kind of excited for them. It's two sides of the coin, birth and death. Conception and death. Both of those are different phases of life, and it's an amazing thing to watch and to see, and to know. But you can't have really one without the other. That is, unfortunately, you can't. It's kind of like life. You can't have just all the good bits. So it is not a surprise that new life and dying actually are very much two sides of the coin. And if you actually are very good at seeing conception, seeing when someone's going to get pregnant, you are very likely to see death too, and be very understand that arena very well. So anyway, hopefully speak to you again soon.